One of the things that I've tried to do in this campaign is to identify innovative, common sense solutions to some of these apparently intractable problems that keep the political parties at each other's throats. So tonight I want to describe a win-win-win policy that could solve two of the principal issues that are keeping the political parties apart. One of those issues is the wave of illegal immigration that is currently coming across the border. The other issue has to do with the integrity of our electoral process and the guarantee that every American should have a right to vote. So what could be a solution that would solve both of those problems? The answer to that question is to make passport cards free. A passport card is a picture identification that is issued by the federal government that can be used as a substitute for a passport. It's an accredited federal ID. They are issued by every one of the 33,000 federal post offices in our country. Almost every American has a post office within easy driving or walking distance of their homes. Currently, those passports cost $65. And for many Americans, and especially poor Americans, that price tag puts passport cards out of reach. Making passport cards free will solve another important problem. And that problem is that millions of Americans today are living as second-class citizens because they do not have a government-issued photo ID. Without a passport or driver's license, you can't open a bank account. You can't board an airplane, you can't check into a hotel, and you can't visit your child at school. If you can't open a bank account, you cash your salary check at a check cashing operation that could take as much as 10% of the value of that check. Shouldn't we all be concerned that the difficulty in accessing a government-issued photo ID has left millions of Americans at the mercy of check cashers and payday lenders, an $11 billion industry? In the interest of pure fairness, we need to make sure that every American can obtain an ID. And I'm not talking about a new form of universal or mandatory identification. In fact, this proposal removes the incentives and nullifies the arguments of those people who've been urging universal mandatory IDs or vaccine passports. Rather, we just make passport cards available to every American who can't afford them, and we assist them in obtaining the necessary paperwork. No one in this country needs to be a second-class citizen. And then there are the two other benefits to this plan. Voter ID laws will no longer be unfair to people who cannot afford or obtain an ID. That's why it will please liberals. My friends, the civil rights leaders Andrew Young, Al Sharpton, and Martin Luther King III are all supporting this proposal. Conservatives will be happy because this proposal goes a long way in fixing our broken electoral system. And everyone will have to prove their identity before they vote. The second benefit is that we can now make employers accountable for hiring people illegally. And that alone will stem the flood of illegal immigration into this country. If you can't find a job in this country, and everybody in the world knows that, then there's no incentive to come here illegally. Right now, employers like construction firms almost never require that prospective employees show a photo ID. And it would be impractical to do so since so many of the working poor in this country don't have an ID. The only ID that is customarily demanded by employers of new employees is a Social Security card, which has no picture, which is easy to fabricate, and which are often passed from person to person. By making it easy for employers to skirt the laws that forbid them from hiring illegal aliens, we are putting the firms that actually hire working Americans and union members in a tremendous disadvantage in the marketplace. Once we've sealed the border and made it impossible for illegal aliens to work in this country, we can then talk about a path to citizenship for people who are already here and about opening the gates to make sure that there are workers able to visit this country from abroad. When this proposal was originally advanced by civil rights leaders on the 50th anniversary of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, it was embraced by people of both political parties, including President Clinton, President Carter, and President Bush. Many of those civil rights leaders have persistently petitioned President Biden to take this common sense step to end the immigration problem and to ensure that every American can vote, and to reassure Americans on both sides of the political spectrum that the voting system in our country has integrity and cannot be cheated. In fact, today, on the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington and Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, leading civil rights leaders, including Andrew Young, Al Sharpton, Martin Luther King III, and many others, again renewed that request to President Biden. And yet President Biden has refused. When I'm President of the United States, during my first week in office, I will issue an executive order to every postmaster in this country to begin issuing free passport cards to every American who can't afford one. As I said at the outset, this is a common sense proposal. The only real argument about it is that it will deplete a revenue stream that is currently going to the U.S. Post Office and the federal government. Over decades, that could end up being a couple of $1 billion. But right now, we're putting $150 billion into making sure that Ukraine can have democracy. We ought to be able to put $1 billion or so into protecting our democracy at home. I ask all of you to give this proposal careful consideration and your support, and write to President Biden and ask him to do the right thing prior to the 2024 election so that every American can vote and that the election has integrity.